tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I'm going to start the talk reciting two Dhammapada verses in Pali, then in English, which have been really a theme for my past week. This Dhammapada verses 3 and 4. Akochimang avadimang jinimang ahasime ye chatang upanaihanti verang tesang nasamati. He abused me, he hit me, he beat me, he took from me. The anger of one who holds to thoughts such as these never ceases, is never cooled. Akochimang avadimang ajinimang ahasime ye chatang nupanayanti verang te supasamati. So he abused me, he hit me, he beat me, he took from me. The anger and hatred of one who doesn't hold to such thoughts is appeased, can be cooled right here. So I've been reciting those for a long time, but they were especially poignant this past week, as last Sunday I was walking in downtown Seattle on 3rd Street at 8 p.m., just 2 blocks, I thought, from the light rail to the bus stop on Columbia and 3rd, and I look back to my left, and there's a gentleman who's quickly approaching me, quite large, tall, and big, and he abused me verbally, and then he came around and he hit me, punched me in the stomach, and then he beat me, threw me down to the ground, and put me in a headlock and then in a chokehold, and he took from me. He didn't actually steal from me, but it really did shake me up. He took away this sense of bodily autonomy or bodily, just a sense of trust or a sense of, maybe it was even a naive sense of safety. But those verses have been especially deep this past week for me. And I was able to get up. The whole time, I didn't even think about fighting back. It just didn't come up. I was partially in shock, but for whatever reasons, didn't think about fighting back and was just basically just getting abused and hit and beaten and taken from. But I think he was confused, and he didn't have the samadhi to actually choke me out, didn't have the ability to pass me out. There was a point when I actually had a little bit of an out-of-body experience, and when I was being choked, and I was like, oh, this would suck to pass out on this street right here. This is not a good place, and a very rational thought, I think. But then I got up, he kind of just backed away. It was just confusing for him, because he was basically just, beating up a rag doll, and he kind of, faded back wherever he came from, and I was able to, my monk kind of sense, took hold, and I kind of calmly and composedly walked for about half a block, and then the kind of wisdom element came up and it's like, Kovilo, are you tripping? Get the heck out of here. And I started running, and I ran down to 2nd Street, and there's more cars there, and then eventually did catch the bus. But it's brought up a lot of thoughts, and honestly, the thoughts that were most primary, and more than just thoughts, feelings, were of gratitude and of privilege, honestly. And so, these are virtues which the Buddha praised, especially gratitude, and there's a specific way that the Buddha taught to reflect on privilege as well. So With regards to gratitude, the Pali term is katanyu katavedi, two-part word, maybe gratitude and thankfulness, and the anyu part of those words means knowledge. It's cognate with the English knowledge or knowing. Knowing what? Knowing that which has been done. So kata, related to karma, knowing that which has been done. And katavedi, feeling that which has been done. So it's an acknowledgement or an appreciation. It has that nuance to it. So, yeah, there were many things to be grateful for. And there's a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, maybe 145, Majjhima 145, the Punawada, where there's this monk named Puna from a country called, I'm blanking on the name right now, but it was purportedly a rough and fierce country, a rough and fierce neighborhood that this monk was from. And the monk comes to the Buddha and he says, I would like to go back to my native country of Sunaparanta. Sunaparanta was the name. And the Buddha says, Sunaparanta, the people there are fierce and they're harsh. What will you do if they abuse you? And Puna, a very wise monastic, says, if they abuse me, if they verbally abuse me, I will think, these Sunaparantans are excellent. They're truly excellent in that they don't hit me. And the Buddha says, well, what would you do, Puna, if those people there, if they hit you? And Puna says, well, if they hit me, I will think, it is excellent. It's truly excellent. These people are excellent in that they didn't beat me. And the Buddha says, well, what would you do, Puna, if they do beat you? And he says, well, I would think they're excellent. They're truly excellent in that they didn't take from me, or they didn't kill me. Eventually he works up to, in that they didn't kill me. And this is a sutta which I've heard and really been impressed with for a long time and have read multiple times. But again, this past week it was coming up many times, even that night. And it came up in a way that I didn't expect, in that those were my immediate thoughts. I didn't have actual pain when I was getting beat up. It was this weird state of shock. I had like shock goggles on, that like all of my physical feelings and emotions were kind of seen through this weird haze. So I wasn't feeling pain in the moment. But yeah, my first thoughts were, oh God, he didn't take anything from me. I had my passport and a bunch of other important cards with me. He didn't steal anything from me. He didn't stab from me. There were a lot of things that could have gone a lot worse. And those were my initial thoughts. And I was happy and kind of impressed that it wasn't even, I think it's a Mike Tyson, attributed to Mike Tyson quote, that everybody's got a plan until they're punched in the face. And that would have been my plan, is to think like this. Oh, at least they didn't hit me. But that's actually what happened. You put in the causes, and even if you can't plan all of the details, it comes up. If you've been training the mind, you've been grooving the mind in a certain way, then those things will come up when the time comes. So grateful for the non-worseness. The situation could have been a lot worse. Also grateful for my material situation, both the material situation that I grew up with. Earlier that day, I had been, for the week preceding that, had been visiting my grandma in sunny South Carolina. I got to take off my normal 6 or 7 layers of clothing, there with my grandma that morning, Sunday morning, eating with my 101-year-old grandma. That's why I was there. Old lady, but very smart, very sharp. We don't agree about many things, but we have great conversations, and she's really bright. And was sitting there having lunch with her, had a mixed green salad with praline goat ball cheese and vinaigrette dressing. So basically in a heaven realm. And this has basically been my whole life, is levels and flavors of heaven realm. So fortunate for my material situation in many ways. And what made this something which is memorable is because this was the most violence that I've ever had inflicted upon me in my whole life. It was only 2 to 4 minutes, but in my whole 42 years on this life, that's the worst. That's the worst that I've had done to me. And that's extreme good fortune. I'm very grateful for all of the causes and conditions, for living in a family that had a loving family, a lot of care, a lot of material support. Very grateful for my material situation. And also, and very importantly, also very grateful for my spiritual situation. I have been the spiritual, while my family largely and society on certain levels have been the causes of the material support that I've gotten, and all of you. As I don't know if some people might not know this, but monks in our tradition, we don't use money. I really don't have a dollar to my name, to my personal name. We don't use money. We don't eat afternoon. We're very in the hands of the people around us. And we've been doing this. I've been doing it for living in monasteries for almost 20 years now. So that's a lot of gratitude, a lot of generosity that I've been on the receiving end of. But the person who I owe the spiritual gratitude for, in the spiritual situation that I'm in, is the Buddha. You know, both for the material requisites, that he set up the Sangha as he did, that I'm able to receive alms, receive calories enough every day to meet my needs, and for the spiritual teachings, that the next verse of the Dhammapada goes, Nahi verena verani samanti da kudachanang, averena cha samanti esa dhammo sanantano. So hatred will never cease through hatred. It is only through non-hatred or love that hatred ceases. This is an eternal law. Esa dhammo sanantano. This is an eternal law. And to believe that and want to believe that is something I'm very, very grateful for. And it is, on one level, you can't make yourself believe that, but I've been reciting that, memorizing that verse, living in communities that do believe that and really are looking at their own hatred when hatred comes up in all of us, even at these monasteries with, a lot of harmless people. We're still humans, anger comes up, but we don't immediately point outwards that everyone out there, anyone out there is the ultimate and total cause of my suffering. I'm the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related to my actions. Whatever I do for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. That's the 5th of the 5 subjects of frequent recollection, which we recite every day. And so training ourselves in this radical sense of responsibility, I'm grateful for it. Because that has been what came up this past week, rather than a narrative of victimhood, which is true. I mean, on one level, I was the victim of an unprovoked attack. Right that night, I actually asked ChatGPT, I was just attacked by one guy and he didn't steal from me. Could I say that I was jumped? And ChatGPT says, well, officially it was just one person, so technically you weren't jumped, but still it sounds like a bad thing. Are you okay? ChatGPT asked me if I was okay. So sweet. Grateful that the thoughts of gratitude came up rather than thoughts of revenge or thoughts of malice. And really, also, in addition to not having feelings of dukkha or pain really come up in that moment, I didn't have emotions of anger come up. And really, this might seem, I don't know if this is hard to believe, but I haven't had them since. And part of that is that I'm also super blessed to be able to be on retreat. I've been on winter retreat, and basically I went from being attacked on Sunday night to meditating 7 hours a day, every day for the last 5 days, every day. Didn't go into alms, wasn't going in for alms, so I could just sit with it and really sit with the reality of what happened and sit with the story that I was telling about the reality that happened, which is really important. So this brings up the next thoughts, which were thoughts about privilege. And the Buddha has a story where he's talking about 4 types of people. It's, I think, Anguttara Nikaya, the Numerical Discourses, chapter 4, Book of the Fours, verse 85. He says there are these 4 types of people existing in the world, and you can imagine it as a 2x2 grid. So you have those who are coming from darkness and heading towards darkness. That's in the upper right quadrant of this grid. Coming from darkness and heading towards darkness. There are those who are coming from darkness and heading towards light. You have those who are coming from light but headed towards darkness, and those who are coming from light and headed towards light. And then he says, what is the person? Who is the person who is coming from darkness and headed towards darkness? And he says, here, someone is born in a situation of not being privileged. They live in India at the time in a low caste where they don't get a lot of food, they don't get enough requisites, they're of ill health. So that's the coming from a place of darkness. This is the language the Buddha used, tamma, coming from a place of darkness or non-privilege, physical non-privilege. And they're heading towards a place of darkness. And this is more about what they're doing. So being unprivileged, they act out of hatred, greed, anger, and delusion by body, speech, and mind. That way, they're heading towards darkness. They came with the conditions that they came with, and they're heading in a dark and bad and painful direction because they're acting out of greed, anger, and delusion. The next group is someone who is coming from darkness, but heading to light. So beneath that quadrant. This is someone, again, who is born in a place of unprivilege. So here that's someone who doesn't grow up with material prosperity, doesn't grow up with material health, is underprivileged, unprivileged in the ways which we can see. But they're heading towards light. And what is that? They're acting by body, speech, and mind through the opposite of greed, anger, and delusion, from a sense of generosity and love, loving kindness, and insight or wisdom. And then you've got the people who are coming from a place of brightness and heading towards darkness. That's someone who was born in a place of privilege in the time of the Buddha. That would have been people who were born in the Brahmin class or in the aristocracy or the Khattiya class, the noble class, and they're healthy and they're wealthy and all this goodness. They're born into that. So we can think of this privilege by birth are these 2 columns, being privileged by birth or being unprivileged by birth. But this quadrant right here in the upper right-hand corner, is they're going towards darkness. That is, they're acting out of body, speech, and mind in ways which lead towards greed, anger, and delusion. They're acting out of greed, anger, and delusion, heading towards a place of darkness. And then below that, you've got people who are born into privilege and are heading towards light, coming from light and heading towards light. That's people who are born with all the privileges that a society might entail, privilege by birth, and they're acting in a privileged way, bringing blessings into the world, creating privilege in their life by acting by body, speech, and mind in ways that are wholesome and are loving. So it's interesting. When you talk about privilege these days, I think there's like a way of talking about that, which is somewhat academic. The term has come to mean just the privilege of birth. Whatever we were born into, we're born with a certain race, we're born with a certain gender, sex, sexual orientation, whatever it is, we're born with that, and depending on the culture that we're in, that has greater or lesser privilege to it. So this is the privilege by birth, and we can't really do much about that. We can't really change those privileges that we were born in a certain country. We didn't make that choice. We were born with certain skin colors into a certain family. We didn't make that choice. And that really, in some ways that this word is used, it's just talking about this type of privilege by birth. And it can be a bit, what do you do about that? What do you do about, Yeah, it's good to examine that, to do the work of examining the privileges that we were born in with. But what do you do with that? And I think here, this horizontal, these two rows, are what we can do with it. And this is privilege by choice. Privilege by choice. We can choose to either, like that first row, we can choose to act out of greed, anger, and delusion by body, speech, and mind, therefore leading to more darkness, or we can choose to act by body, speech, and mind in ways which brings light to the world, regardless of the privileges or non-privileges that we were born into. And that's hopefully what we can all incline towards here. We were born, all of us were born with certain conditions, and we can do something about that. And here I think it's useful to not so much speak in terms of privilege of choice, because privilege, it has just become a word which does mean this, privilege by birth. But we can think about it as good fortune or as blessings. The chant that I was going to do this morning was the highest blessings on page 46, which is a list of the 38 highest blessings that the Buddha says, and they're all actions, they're all choices we can make to bring blessings into our own life and into the lives of the people around us. And that puts us in this second row of choosing to bring blessings into the world, choosing a place of mental and spiritual privilege. So there are a few more Dhammapada verses which I think are relevant here. The Dhammapada is kind of like the Sermon on the Mount, a little bit. A very little bit, a little bit. It's like 423 verses, so a lot longer than the Sermon on the Mount, but really the pith, it's really essence teachings. So 26 chapters, each chapter on a different topic. And in the chapter on happiness, on sukha, the first 4 verses are very relevant. So verse 197 starts, Susukang vata jivama, verinesu averino, verinesu manusesu, viharama averino. So happily, so happily we live, or you could translate that, privileged, so privileged we live. Amongst those who are hateful, we live without hate. Privileged, so privileged do we abide. Amongst those who are hateful, we abide without hate. The next verse, same theme, Susukang vatajivama, aturesu anaturang, aturesu manusesu viharama anatura. So here, again, happily, so happily do we live, can we live. Privileged, so privileged can we live. We who are untroubled amongst those who are troubled. And here it's talking to a level of being mentally untroubled. In a different place, the Buddha is talking to Nalaka Putta, a gentleman, a layman who's on his deathbed. And he says, you should train yourself thus. Although I am bothered and afflicted by body, atura, although I'm afflicted by body, I will not be afflicted by mind. So here it is, privileged, how utterly privileged we are. Living amongst those who are afflicted and bothered, we dwell without affliction. And the next verse is, Susukang vatajivama, usukesu anusuka, usukesu manusesu viharama anusuka. So happily can we dwell. So privileged can we dwell amongst those who are agitated and those who are anxious and fearful. We can dwell calmly. In the next verse, verse 200, starts the same with that first verse, Susukang vata jivama. So happily, how happily we can live. Fortunate, how fortunate we are. Blessed, how blessed we are. Privileged, how privileged we are. Yesang no nati kinchanang, piti baka bhavisama, deva abasara yata. So privileged are we. We who dwell with nothing We who have nothing, we feed on bliss. We can feed on bliss like the radiant devas. So that's a whole nother level. That takes it to another level when you say you're feeding on bliss. But can we incline in that direction? What are we feeding on? What are the thoughts that we're feeding on? Are we feeding on our stories of victimhood, our stories of not having a say in things? Are we feeding on our stories of revenge and being harmed? Or are we feeding on and making the choice, to the extent that we can, to lean in a direction of forgiveness, lean in a direction of non-anger? It's interesting, the Pali word kama for patience also means forgiveness. So patience and forgiveness have this intimately related quality. So I'll just relate that story, kind of traveling last Sunday from this utter deva realm, this utter place of privilege, into a place of real darkness, and very grateful, feel very privileged that it didn't really touch me in a way. It really felt like moving in a direction towards light, both during and after. So conclude the talk there.
หันธรรมยังธรรมคาถาสาธุการังทดามาเสสาธุสาธุสาธุอนุโมทามิ
Okay. So people, this is a time when people can bring things up. You have questions or comments, and on chat you can also raise your cartoon hand, and maybe Trenton or Chia, you can turn it to the everybody view if that's possible. And just to answer the question, on Monday, I did start feeling dukkha in the body. It's pretty much once I got on the bus, and then the next day was pretty bad, but I had the good fortune to be able to, I didn't go on alms and was just basically able to take a rest and lie my body down, and by today I'm just only experiencing a little bit of soreness in my back. So, yeah, please.
I'm glad you're okay. Story reminded me of, it's been a lot of violence in Seattle, and sort of people that I know, and friends of friends. And it's made me wonder, because I've witnessed a lot of violence in the streets, and I'm not sure what the skillful thing to do is when witnessing violence. Is there a way to interject and help others skillfully? Is there a way to put yourself in between people? What would the monastics do in situations where they're witnessing violence between two people?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry that, you have friends who are experiencing that. Another story about downtown Seattle, maybe a year ago, Ajahn and I were returning from alms round at 7:50 in the morning, and as we're walking along First Street back to the ferry, we see a cop car screech, turn around, and then both cops get out of the car and see this gentleman who's yelling and pulling a suitcase, running up a hill, and then we hear yelling from both sides, and then we witness this guy getting shot, witness him getting shot and tased, and I think we did learn later that he didn't die, but yeah, what did we do in that moment? There was a woman who was just walking, just happened to be, we didn't know her, she was just a little bit behind us, and she witnessed it as well. And Ajahn just went into she really started breaking down. She started crying and shaking, and Ajahn without thinking, really just took her aside and totally had a extremely one-on-one, just consoling and bringing a lot of peace to her. And we weren't in a place, it wasn't far. It was just diagonally across the street, but we were able to do what we could do, which is have an effect on the people around us. And I was really impressed with Ajahn Nisabo in that moment. And if we had been closer, I don't know. I mean, definitely we want to be safe ourselves. And if you don't have the skills, either like physically, if we don't have the skills physically or verbally to interject in a way which keeps us safe, then yeah, doing or not doing what you can, every situation will be so different. But yeah, see if you can be a place of light, be a beacon of light and calmness and non-anger. I think that really can have an effect. It really was like, I do feel like I was protected in that moment, even if it was just by the protection of, I had been reciting the name of Guanyin and Buddha the whole plane ride, as I was, so I had been priming myself. And, I've been a monk for 15 plus years, living at monasteries for 20, and we do this all the time, and we're priming ourselves. So before we get into that kind of situation, wherever it might be, just priming yourself, seeing the value in loving kindness, the value in forgiveness, the value in non-anger, and the value in non-violence. And then that will be a past condition which will influence your present wisdom that you're able to have in that moment. So, yeah, thank you. Yeah, maybe Judith.
Can you say more about the story that was playing and how you worked with it?
Yeah, the story really was just, I didn't really tell anybody. Dave and Allison, whose house I live behind, Ajahn Nisabo and I both live behind, they were so kind and picked me up from the ferry station, and I told them about it before I told Ajahn Nisabo. And I told Ajahn Nisabo, and then I really haven't told anybody else about it, so I've just been sitting with it. And then, during meditation, a lot of the skill of meditation is putting down stories. So practicing 7 hours a day, for a lot of part of that, putting down stories, putting down any kind of story that would come up, even if it's helpful. But there were times when, like, the most impactful, significant on one level, violent on many levels, event in my life occurred Sunday, so that was just naturally coming up, and there were times when I couldn't just put it down, and it made sense for me to kind of process it while I'm meditating. And honestly, it mostly was trying to run through actually what happened. Like, what did he do to me? What was I feeling physically? Wow, weird. Not really much. He punched me in my stomach, and I can see it happening, but didn't feel it happening. Had this out-of-body experience. That was weird. Remembering the people who I encountered after that, like the people at the bus stop, like I was really in a place of shock and fear. And I'm like, who can I trust? And there are these two people who also, were, drinking alcohol and under influence of, I think, a few other things, but turned out to be really, I felt like they were Dharma protectors, like they were angels. They were just like sent to protect me. They weren't doing anything other than just being nice to me. And it's like I had come from it's a very dark and scary place that I had come from, and then like just feeling totally protected by these strangers who otherwise, if that hadn't happened to me, I would just seen them and be like, oh, those guys, I don't know if I want to talk to them. And then same on the bus, a weird night. I was verbally accosted by somebody who yelled at me and said I was, what are you practicing witchcraft, in a very kind of a scary way. And this guy in the back, this really big guy, thank goodness, he says, quit yelling at him, he looks sweet. And he was so sweet. Big guy, real big guy. And then I'm like just sitting in the bus chair there, and then just like, that's when I started to feel the pain. So I'm just like putting on my robes had like fallen off halfway, and I had ran around 2 blocks with robes falling off, and then finally fixed myself. And then that guy, my Dharma protector on the bus, in such a sweet voice, he says, Sensei. He says, Sensei, how is your back? And I didn't say anything. I went back and sat right next to him. I'm like, my back is hurting. My back is hurting. And then he did this thing, which I'm not sure it really helped, but he kind of like put me on his back and then kind of cracked my back. But we ended up talking until I got off the bus, and a super sweet guy. And So like went through that in my head, like the whole situation, what I did before, during, and after. You know, what I was doing before, honestly, that is a scary place. Yesterday was my mom's birthday, and I hadn't told her till her birthday. It was, that wasn't the gift, that wasn't the gift. I just hadn't talked with her until yesterday. And I don't know why, I thought maybe she would listen to this and feel like, you didn't tell me, but told her, so she's like, did you call the police? And I hadn't called the police, and she said, you probably should, just to let them know that it happened so that maybe they could do something. And so I did leave a message, you know, called the police and talked to somebody. And it is a sketchy place. The light rail train station on Yesler and 3rd, between 3rd and 2nd, it is a dark place. I got out of that train station, I'm like, although I've been reciting Guanyin and with my meditation object all day, or for most of the day, certainly not all the day, but fear really came up before I saw a single person. And I was lost. I didn't know which. I thought I would be coming out a different exit. So I'm already afraid, and then that was influencing, you know, present conditions that were training my mind state when it happened. And so basically running through it. But then really anytime it would come up, like what story do I want to tell about this? Just gratitude for the Dhamma, gratitude that I believe that hatred never ceases through hatred. And fortunately, I have a lot of problems. I'm a human. I have like mental, greed, anger. I have my own flavors of greed, anger, and delusion. But for whatever reasons, like anger just hasn't been coming up, fortunately. And grateful for that and leaning in that direction. And really, I did feel like it was a week of, it could have very much been a week of post-traumatic stress, the beginning of PTSD. But because I was able to sit with it, I had the good fortune to be able to sit with it. And because I had these Dharma principles, which I believe in and I want to believe in, and I do believe lead to light and more light, I was able to experience a week of possible post-traumatic growth. You know, priming myself. I don't want to feel anger. If anger comes up in the future, I hope I can let it go. If hurt or other issues come up in the future, I hope I can deal with those in the same way. Grateful for the Dhamma. And honestly, I was the victim, but someone who feels that anger and hatred and violence are the way of solving problems, that's a truly victim mindset. That's a truly horrible thing to believe about the universe. And so I'm not a victim in that way, and feel grateful that, I believe in the Buddhist teachings to that extent. Yeah. Jen.
A lot of this talk reminds me and reflects back when I was listening again around Martin Luther King Day. Gosh, I might start crying. About when you talk about those 4 quadrants, so many of the people in that movement had come from a place of less privilege. And yet, through his compassion, his kindness, he talked about this word purification. And he said, before you go to any demonstration, before you go anywhere, these are people that have trained themselves to know that they are going to experience violence. That is at such a deep level of connection, of saying, I am willing to put my body forth because I feel connected to everybody else, to have others witness and say, we don't want this anymore. It is amazing. And the process that you've gone through to have someone strike you and just not react is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. And thank you very much for bringing Dr. Martin Luther King into this. And went on a walk with Dave yesterday when we were talking about this, and he brought up MLK as well. And
Gandhi.
And Gandhi, yeah, and many others in their movements. And it did bring to mind that there are different ways to, quote unquote, do nonviolent resistance. There's the nonviolence of MLK and Gandhi and many others. I mean, just thinking, just in the Gandhi movie, when there's that line of people who are going to, I think, make salt from the ocean, and then they're just going extremely peaceably and just getting batoned, just beaten row after row and just taking it like that. That truly nonviolent in body, speech, and mind, that has a big power to it, which I think that a nonviolent in body, like there's actually a protest this afternoon downtown by the Chihuly exhibit. Chihuly. Yeah, by that place and the Space Needle. Big protest, hands off, Seattle Fights Back, and it's purported to be a nonviolent march. But I asked someone earlier this week, are you going to that? And they said, actually, although it says it's going to be nonviolent, I don't think I would feel actually safe there, because there is a brand of nonviolence, which although it's not throwing Molotov cocktails and it's not setting things on fire and physically assaulting people, it is like verbally abusive and harsh and hateful. And for me, images of Dr. Martin Luther King, images of Gandhi, images of that young woman after segregation who is like first black girl going to a white school and just being assaulted and like spit on by all the like white people, just in her utter dignity. I mean, that is the kind of nonviolent resistance, which is like, that is beautiful and that will make change. And I don't want to, for me, I think that is an interesting distinction to look at, and different types of nonviolent resistance, and which ones, I don't want to come down one way or another on the ways people express their resistance, but for me, one of them is more beautiful and maybe has more of an impact on the heart. Yeah, Trenton, please.
We have some raised hands on Zoom. First, we have Sophia.
Sophia. Is that Suze?
Sophia Sansoni, perhaps? Sorry if I
Hi.
mispronounced.
No,
Okay.
you're great. Thank you. I was just wondering, I think you mentioned there was like 80 habits or practices towards moving towards light. I just didn't catch what that was.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's 38, and it's in the Sutta on the highest blessings in our chanting book. And maybe, Trenton, you can put a link to that. It's on page 46. So avoiding those foolish ways, associating with the wise, honoring those worthy of honor, all the way up to being generous and looking after family and being patient and being respectful and practicing the Four Noble Truths, and the realization of Nibbana is the highest blessing. So, yep, that's the list. And maybe just one more. So maybe, is Suze the next person?
Larry is next.
Larry, okay.
Ajahn Kovilo, sorry for the mishap. How did the event affect your meditation?
Another plug for those Zoom meditations, they're awesome. There's a real sweet group of people who usually do have their cameras on, one of which I'll name is Juanita. She's there a lot. And just at the end, most of the time we have our eyes closed, but at the end, all unmute, ring a bell, and then people will wave, we'll do this, and then we wave to each other, and just seeing people's smiles, like so easy to just be grateful for that. But before that, the actual meditation, part of me was, it just kept coming up in the meditation, and I would put it down, and then I can't put it down anymore. Or if I could, then I would just stay with the breath, a beautiful breath. But if I couldn't, then just looking at the story, and for the most part, it was just trying to remember the actual facts of the thing, and then also, to the extent that I could, guiding it with these Dhammapada verses or other sutta quotes. So, it didn't really have a huge effect on my meditation. I didn't go to the morning meditation or the midday meditation on Monday because I was out. But yeah, after that, it was good.